recording. So I'm going to, okay. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to, no, why isn't that going to go down? Oh, there I go. You can feel free to stick them in the chat, and Michelle will keep an eye on the chat. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
Or just shout them out. But if
no, I got it. I got it.
If you ask too many questions, we'll just have to tell you to be quiet, and we'll carry on, and then we'll get them at the end. A lot of I tried to put this together in a logical way. It may not be logical, but bear with me, because we've never done this before. So if you bear with me, I'd appreciate it, because in my mind it's logical, but it may not be logical. So and I also want to introduce Michelle, who's on. Say hi, Michelle.
Hi.
So Michelle is the BRVCA board treasurer, and the president is Pat. Pat tends to work really late, so we'll see if he jumps on or not. So this is kind of what we're going to go through. We're going to talk a little bit about the legal framework of any nonprofit, actually, the role of the directors, the role of the board of directors, the role of a director. Okay, why can't I go down? Go down. Oop. Oh yeah. Then we're going to do the history of the BRVCA, the current structure, a committee terms of reference, because most of you will know by now that committees are kind of important within BRVCA, current policies and controls, and closing remarks. I want to tell you, I plagiarized from a board governance workshop that we were given for some of this, and then I created some of this myself. So we are doing this for everybody that's involved one way or the other with BRVCA. And what we have learned is that it's very hard in the nonprofit world. There's not a lot of money, and the best way to survive not a lot of money is to work together, and in a respectful way, and so that we can accomplish the goals that we've set out to do. So what does good governance look like? So a shared vision for the future that is in service of our members, which is everybody in the Bridge River Valley, that is used to guide decisions, inform choices, agreement on what we are striving for together. Values or guiding principles that inform how we take actions. We live by those values. We really, really do try to live by them. We don't just give them lip service. Our board of directors is unified and has been unified for a number of years. We had one blip for a little bit, but and we present the board's decisions to the members and public with one voice, and this also applies to each committee. And we've been through some kind of difficult things, and we've managed to stick together through thick and thin with what we say publicly. And that our board of directors, our committee chairs and treasurers, which you can hear about, respect and abide by the policies of the board all the time, that we have respectful discussion and disagreement is welcome. But we have to be able to listen to each other and kind of try to work it through, basically. And another really important aspect of good governance is being positive and support the organizations, its committees, members and fellows, directors, committee chairs, treasurers, blah, 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 on and on, that we stay positive and support all of those. There's ways to deal with problems, and generally it's not publicly. So this is the part that's very similar to all nonprofits. So in order to be incorporated as a nonprofit, you must put in a name, approval, and registration, constitution, your bylaws, your list of your first directors, and your address. So BRVCA has been incorporated since 1996, not under the same name, but since 1996. So we have a constitution, and the purposes of that are in that constitution, and this is quite interesting, is to protect and advance the interests of residents and ratepayers in the Upper Bridge River Valley as expressed in the official community plan. So we give quite a bit of credence to the official community plan, to encourage and assist in the promotion of economic development. And that is a bring forward from when the society was called the Bridge River Valley Economic Development Society. It was originally put into place as an economic development society. It isn't anymore. It's part of it. We encourage voluntary community or individual enterprise to cooperate with other community organizations. And this is interesting and maybe a little different than some nonprofits. One of our purposes is to assist government agencies at all levels by being aware of government functions, procedures, and services, by entering into contractual arrangements and/or agreements with appropriate agencies for the financial and administrative management. That's a lot of words, but essentially an example of that would be some of the tenures that we have signed. Right now, LaJoy Lake has received a permit to do some aeration activities. That's an example of what we see as what we do. And we represent the Bridge River Valley residents and ratepayers to appropriate government agencies. And a good example of that is our Valley-wide Forestry Committee, which supports all of our residents in the forestry world at a high level. But we also try to teach the residents in each neighborhood a little bit of the current sort of forestry world, and to help them work over certain cutting permit and that type of thing. So we see that as one of our purposes. To represent and assist Bridge River Valley residents to obtain, maintain, and improve recreational facilities, both public and private. And an example of that right now is around the trails, around the Braylorn Recreation Area. We've got the Braylorn Hall, which is kind of just sitting there. But that's one of the purposes that we see of the BRVCA. And finally, last but not least, to prevent pollution and abuse of land and natural resources. And that definitely has come into play in the last few years, particularly through COVID, when people kind of were trying to escape up here. And we definitely had to do as much education and things that we could do to try and prevent the abuse in this area. Anybody got any questions about the Constitution? It's pretty dry, but that's essentially what it's about. So with the Society Act, you must also have bylaws. So basically, bylaws govern what the society does. They really are the legal statements of how you are supposed to do things. So they cover how you take in members, when they cease to be in good standing, how you call a general meeting, how you voted a general meeting, how you can remove directors, et cetera, how you can borrow, and how you prepare and hold your minutes. And amazing as it may seem, we have dealt with every single one of those bullets, and we revised our bylaws in 2021 extensively, both based on the new BC Society Act, as well as some experiences we were going through. So I'm going to send you this PowerPoint after this meeting, and there's links here where you can actually see everything. Even if you're really keen to read bylaws, good on you. But our bylaws are not just taken, like they call them the Schedule B. We custom design them for BRVCA. So a director, so this is why we're doing this orientation. So just to differentiate between the board of directors or a director and the committee. So the board of directors, which we currently have 5 directors, we can have up to 11. It's varied over time. It's gone up and down. People have come and gone, pretty typical. So a director may exercise all the powers and do all the things that the society may do, and that are not by these bylaws or by any statute or any other lawful thing. You can, as long as you're not going contrary to any of those things. So the laws affecting the society, the bylaws, the rules, we have policies, which you're going to hear about in a little bit. So the role of a director is very legal. So, and in fact, they specify in the Society Act what directors, what their responsibility is legally. So the first one is duty of care. So that just means you must take reasonable care when you're making a decision. You need to be aware of everything the society has, their mission, their plans, all that kind of stuff. And you also must make sure that the organization's activities are in accordance with the mission, plans, policies, and all the stuff related to the society and the community at large. And it's interesting, they call it the duty of obedience. My goodness. You must participate, directors must participate in board meetings, and decisions and deliberations, and directors need to read everything. So an example of that is just over a week ago, we had a board meeting. What we do at the 6 month is look at variance reports of financials, budget to actual. And it's not all that fun to look at those things, but we do. Are you laughing, Michelle? Yeah, so another legal responsibility for a director, a board of director or its directors, is to be loyal. And so they specify that as acting in the best interests of the organization, and never use information obtained from your position as a director or within the organization for personal gain. Directors should always be focused on the priorities of the organization and not their own or that of another organization. And well, that's a big word, corollary of this duty of loyalty is recusal. So stand aside if you have a conflict. And we have a conflict of interest policy, and a lot of people think conflict of interest is a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you don't deal with it. If you deal with it properly, it's not a bad thing. And in the Bridge River Valley, we have a lot of conflict of interest because there's not very many of us doing a lot of different things. So more on that in a minute. And then finally, the role of the board is to manage. So you have to use discretion and flexibility in the day-to-day management of the organization in relation to staff and contractors and with our committees, which are a lot. So there's no correct model. And what we've done is customize. Don't forget, this is coming out of the Society Act. We've customized to our circumstances and how we've structured the BRVCA. Clearly defined roles, a common understanding of these roles, along with active enforcement of this understanding, is necessary to achieve high performance. And that's precisely what we're doing tonight, is try to clarify, particularly with new people, different roles. We're not perfect at it by any means, but Michelle, did you want to say something there?
No.
No? Okay. So the role of the board of directors is to determine the mission and vision for the whole organization, ensure effective organizational planning goes on, including a strategic plan and annual budget, ensuring adequate resources and managing these resources, which is really challenging. And we'll get into this in a bit when you have a decentralized umbrella structure, and monitoring the activities. And I'm not sure we actually have an approved system of controls and reports, but there's an awful lot of communication going back and forth between everybody that's involved with BRVCA. So here's this is one of the main differences in our area of us to other nonprofits here. And if you go outside of here and you go to a larger place like Kamloops or Kelowna or Vancouver, you will find there's more boards like us and less working boards. So these are the different kinds of models. You probably never knew this, but there's quite a few different models of board governance. And so the most common form of board governance, and particularly here, is the working board. So that's where, if you're elected as a director, you're heavily involved in the day-to-day activities. And it's usually when there's no paid staff or very few, or not very many hours of your paid staff. So the upside of this kind of model is you really use the skills and expertise of directors and committee members to do what the organization is supposed to be doing. The downside of it is that directors or committee members can become so involved in the day-to-day that the bigger picture stuff, strategy and policies, are overlooked. There can be duplication, and it can result in inconsistency in decision-making, since many decisions are made at a committee level or by volunteers rather than being deliberated by full board. But it's common because many nonprofits don't have the resources to pay people. The policy board is the type of board that BRVCA is mainly. So what our board of directors tries to do is establish the guiding principles and policies for the organization, but delegates responsibility and authority for implementation, exactly what we do. And you'll learn a little bit more about that. We monitor the progress within guiding principles and policies. And we have a very typically found in an organization with trusted and experienced staff, which we have fortunately at the moment, and active committee structures, which we also have. So the pros of this model is it offers the most clarity on roles and relationships. Our board focuses on governance, strategy, and accountability. And the committees focus on the execution of the things we want to get done in the Valley. The experience of directors is still at that table and still has a say on the ongoing day-to-day management of the organization. The cons are you must have the resources for paid staff in place that are skilled or trusted, or committees with engaged and committed volunteers, which we do sort of most of the time. So that is the kind of board that BRVCA is. We are not, our board of directors is not a working board. They're there just kind of overseeing the governance of the organization. So now we come to the committees, which I know one way or another, I think almost everybody here, maybe except for Cole, is involved in a committee. And so the role of the committee chair is to run the committee meetings and ensure that committee members have the information necessary to fulfill the mandate of that committee. They establish the agenda and ensure that the minutes are done. Doesn't mean they do them themselves, but they make sure it happens. And then occasionally there's communication back and forth between the committee chair and the board of directors. And you must be a member of BRVCA. Then the other main role on the committee, the way we have it structured, is the treasurer. You're not writing checks and you're not posting things in an accounting system. What you are doing is getting reports and keeping an eye on them, looking at what's being spent and how that matches up with the budget. You're generally approving invoices after making sure they're okay. And you get reports from our accounting system once every 2 months. So that report will tell you what you have spent or taken in an income and for the last 2 months, and you need to check it. And it's interesting because the Trails Committee found a miscoding, so they were charged $200 for something which actually should have gone to training. So that's just an error. And then we also send an all dates report, which actually basically tells you what your bank, if you had a bank account, what your bank balance is. And here's where things start to get a little different, because when we talked about how this system would work with committees being very autonomous and so on and so forth, one of the, at the time, and we're going to go into this in a minute, at the time, many nonprofits here were really, really struggling. And so we talked about it, and our first committee that we took on was the Braille Learn Community Advisory Committee, and we talked about making it easy for people to be members of a committee. Like, they can come and go. They don't have to be a member of BRVCA. Some of the terms of references of the committee say who should be elected, but the BRVCA only expects the chair and the treasurer to be elected. And generally, each of these committees are considered to be the doers. So if we talked about the board of directors as being sort of the governance and the management of and making sure everything is done right, the committees are the ones actually accomplishing stuff in our community. And we do have an attendance policy because sometimes people come and go. And so if there is a policy which is a very nice policy, and we just follow up every so often if somebody kind of disappears. Any questions on that?
Yeah, Deb, it's Dale here.
Hi, Dale.
Who elects the committee chair and the committee treasurer?
So say you're having a meeting and it's the meeting where you're going to elect your committee chair and your treasurer. You can specify this in the terms of reference.
Okay.
More precisely, it's up to you. It's up to the committee, but generally whoever's at that meeting is who's going to elect the committee chair and the committee treasurer. What we've found is that generally there aren't elections. They're more like whoever sticks their hand up ends up being the committee chair or treasurer.
So it's within the board of reference of that specific committee, whether
Yes.
To elect, you'd have to be a member or what have you. That's all in the board.
Exactly.
Okay.
As far as BRVCA is concerned, the only two that must be a member of BRVCA are the chair and the treasurer.
Okay.
Because there's accountability there. And you'll see the terms of reference in a sec.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump back just a little bit to the history of the BRVCA. So it used to be called the Ridge Valley Economic Development Society, and actually Russell Oakley, God bless his soul, he started a process because at the time there were 17 nonprofits up here, most of which were struggling, and they weren't actually doing much. They were having a hard time getting their boards in place. And so he had a series of meetings, public meetings, and he found a consultant who did some research. And they came back with she came back with another organization in BC called Hornby Island Residents and Ratepayers Association. So that Hornby Island is small geographically, so it's different from us in that respect, but they had a very low population. And so they took on this umbrella structure and a decentralized umbrella structure, which basically does everything on Hornby Island. So we put this to people in the community. At the time, it was the Braylorn. There was a society in Braylorn that they couldn't get a board. They'd have AGMs, nobody would come. They were getting absolutely nothing done. So we had a couple of meetings in Braylorn, and everybody agreed to give this a try. So that society up there was dissolved, and they became what's known as BCAC, the Braylorn Community Advisory Committee, and they were our first committee. As it says here, it was just limited volunteer capacity. People were just burned out. And so that we went ahead. That was in 22. So the concept was, as I've kind of already described, that the board and the organization is sort of the governance structure, while the committees are the ones actually doing stuff. And so that is essentially the structure. And when we started out, we referred to it as a bus. So, the board and the, kind of the organization were driving the bus, and all these committees were jumping on the bus, okay, fine. Now we call it a decentralized umbrella structure. So that's kind of where we've evolved to. Oops. So oversight, strategic direction, financial stewardship, legal and risk concerns reside with the BRVCA board. Those are the places where there's got to be super strong communication between our board and the committees. We've had a few different legal situations, risk situations. If one part of this umbrella screws up and spends too much money, it impacts everybody else. So we're kind of, don't want to call it a bus, but we're kind of all on the ship together. So if somebody pokes a hole in it, there's going to be an issue for everybody. So there has to be super strong communication, and so far we've managed to. I mean, we've had our ups and downs, but we've managed to survive. But we're growing, and we've grown quite a lot since we started this. So it's work. So the committees lead on implementation and operate in accordance with their terms of reference and their approved annual budget. I mentioned it was Hornby Island. So again, and part of why we're doing this orientation, and we do other things as well, is there has to be clarity on roles and responsibilities. So who does what to who, and that there's communication back and forth constantly. And, you know, for the most part, it's been very collegial, and people get it. You know, if you think about that ship and somebody poking a hole, people understand. So everybody's pretty cooperative. Any questions on how we got here? So this is what BRVCA looks like today. So that little box that says Community Resource Building, the Tourism Info Center, our business services, some small projects. Lori, the Reimer, our grant writer. Kara is the financial administrator. This year we have Cole on, he's doing the groundskeeping. All that stuff comes out of our core, what we call our core. It's not run by a committee, it's just our core stuff. That includes Hailmore too. But then you'll see along this line, all the different committees with the subcommittees. So we've got Braylorn Community Advisory Committee, which has the hall and the ball diamond and the Braylorn Recreation Area, the Marshall Valley Community Association, LaJoy Lake Residents, the Trails Committee, the Economic Development Committee, the Heritage Committee, which looks after and manages the cemetery, the church, Hailmore, and the museum. The museum is a bit of a different beast because we have a management agreement there. And then we have our events. So we've got, this past year, we had a Winterfest committee, Remembrance Day, and Canada Day. And then we have some community committees. We've got our Valleywide Natural Resources and Land Use Committee, Forestry, Mining. We've got the Gun Lake Boat Launch Committee, the Bear Working Group, the Braylorn TV, and the Trading Committee. So, yeah. Any comments on that? So that's just relisting them. So every committee has a terms of reference. So basically that's that committee's kind of rules of the road. There are some parts of it that need to be in every committee's terms of reference. And we actually have a policy that spells that out. And I'm not going to go into it, but you can read that. And it spells out exactly what the committees do and their terms of reference and what has to be in the terms of reference and all that kind of stuff. And that basically is kind of the agreement between that committee and the BRVCA board. And so it spells out, and the board approves it. It spells out what they're doing. The only other things that committees really have to do is they have to submit an annual budget, which the board looks at and actually gets put into our QuickBooks, and that's how we can look at variances. Well, 2 times a year. 3 times a year is asking a lot. But we definitely do it a couple of times a year. And we do keep an eye, like today we went back to a couple of committees asking them, you know, and it's probably just fine, but they had, you know, a huge variance on a particular line. So we just asked them for an explanation. So the committees, with their terms of reference, they're responsible to develop their own strategic plan and budget requests. So it's kind of up to each committee to do that. Like, what are you trying to do? What is it going to cost, etc. Funding, BRVCA does receive some tax requisitions, which we allocate out as we can to various committees. So this year, the Braylon Recreation Area is going to get $2,000 for trail development. The Trails Committee is going to get $3,000 for trail development. Yeah, so there is some funding that we can disperse, and we do that. We have one meeting where we all get together and discuss this stuff, and that's how we decide who's going to get what money, by all of us being together. The expense, the signing authorities. So our 2 official signing authorities are our treasurer, Michelle. Poor Michelle signs just about every single thing. Right, Michelle?
I do. I'm like famous. Just sign away all day long. Everyone wants my signature.
Yeah, and our president's the other official signing authority, but for expenses and stuff, if your committee wants your chair or your treasurer to sign off on invoices and stuff, they are the signer. And as I mentioned, we do variance reports a couple of times a year. So anything legal, like a contract or a tenure or a permit or anything like that, has to go through the BRVCA board. Sometimes there'll be questions. A lot of times there isn't, but it is reviewed. And one of the 2 legal signing authorities, the president or the treasurer or both, have to sign, and it's in BRVCA's name. We manage that pretty well. And we often find a place to say so and such of a commit, you know, it's Bridgewater Valley Community Association. And then, you know, we get in there so and such of a committee, right? So people know who it is actually, right? Yeah, any questions about that? So I think you can kind of see the back and forthing between the board and the committees. But for the most part, they're kind of left to do what they're going to do. Legal, risk, financial is where there has to be interaction. So we started doing this this way in 2012. And we soon discovered, you know, when you have a decentralized organization like we do, it's flat. Well, you saw that org chart, it's flat. And so we had to figure out how to have some rules of the road that we all agree on. And it was actually Suzanne Dembach, for those of you who know her, who did a workshop with us. And one of her main recommendations was to develop policies, because with a policy you depersonalize, and in in a small community like ours with a flat organization, the policy is sort of the agreed upon way we're going to do X, Y, or Z. So when we do create a policy, it's an all organization process. So it's not something the board of directors comes out with and announces. It could be generated from anybody. a committee, a person, a board, anything. And then a draft will be done. The board approves that draft, and then it goes out to all the committees for their discussion and approval. And they can send it back. They send it back to us. They may make suggestions for changes, and it'll be looked at again, and it may be changed. It may be sent out again. Eventually, it'll get approved. And some of our policies we've updated using the same process. We've updated once or twice in the 10 years we've been doing this. So yeah. So there are quite a few policies. This is just a sampling, but these are the main ones. One of the key policies is the financial policy, and when you look at it, you'll see it spells everything out. And where we catch little omissions and stuff, we fix it, because obviously finances are important to all of us. We have a code of conduct policy, and that was just created in the last couple of years, and it's pretty nice, the code of conduct, but it's just to ensure that everybody understands the expectations. When we've had a problem, the code of conduct policy comes out. We have a conflict of interest policy, which, as I said before, conflict of interest, we're pretty much all in one way, shape, or form in a conflict of interest somehow up here. There's just too few of us doing too many things. We work, we've got businesses, we're in other organizations. So I think it's important that you read the conflict of interest policy. It is not a prescriptive document. It's a document that says, hey, give this a thought. And if you think you're in a conflict of interest, just write it on this form once a year. And if it comes up, you tell the chair of the committee or the chair of the board meeting or whatever it is, just say, I think I might be in a conflict of interest here. And what usually happens is people just leave the meeting. We have a complete board policy, committees of the board policy, which Dale, you will want to read it. But it basically says everything I've just said. We have a communication policy. We have a pretty extensive social media policy, because we have pretty extensive social media, and we have an attendance policy. This is just a few of the policies we have. We have an advertising payment policy. We have a, you name it, we've got it. So, but these are the main ones. Michelle, did you want to say anything about policies?
No, I mean, it's a good idea for everyone to have a read of them. And then, if you're ever unsure of something, you go back and you read the policy, and it's all in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, long and short, the decentralized umbrella. So, committees can operate as autonomously as possible within the nonprofit framework. And that, guys, that's why I went through all that boring stuff on the board of directors, because essentially the board of directors is where the ultimate accountability for the entire organization, all those committees, everything rests. So committees are still a part of BRVCA and all that entails. The BRVCA board is the legal entity where the buck stops. And things are beautiful until there's a problem. And then, but we've learned a lot about working with the committees and stuff to get beyond problems. The board's most particular concerns revolve around legal stuff, like contracts, or somebody's going to sue you, or whatever, risk and financial accountability. And what we've learned it's just communication is key, like in life, right? So if you look at sort of those are the things, if you're going to become a committee, thinking of Dale here, you're going to become a committee, that's kind of the world you're going to be operating in, right? It's not like you're out there just doing totally whatever you want. As long as you're kind of within those, that framework, we don't even want to know really what you do. Well, we do want to know, but you know, it's not like we're in your business all the time. So what are some of the benefits? Well, we take an awful lot of official paperwork off people's plates. So when you're a nonprofit or a charitable organization, there's a lot of stuff that you are supposed to be doing, and we do it all. Then we share the costs, and this is one of the biggest advantages, I think. So for an example, with our insurance, this year, the Braylon Recreation Area will have a $1,600 share, but I've got Braylon TV here. I think Marshall Valley is something like $80. That's what they're paying for insurance. They're paying that is their share of the total insurance bill. Bookkeeping and accounting, because everything goes into one QuickBooks system, and there's one bank account. Well, actually, there's a gaming account too, but we share all of that, and we share out the costs. So just as an example, the Marshall Valley this year is paying $80. The museum pays quite a bit more because they've got a lot more stuff going on. But that just gives you an idea. And the way we figure that out is once a year we have a meeting where all the treasurers or chairs or both come, and we sort of lay it out, and we may do a little dickering, and we all agree on, you know, who's going to pay how much at the end of it. I put a couple of examples of what many smaller nonprofits wouldn't be able to do. We have a whole bunch of different paid accounts. So this Zoom meeting, for example, we have a paid Zoom, we have a paid MailChimp, which, you know, if people really want to use a sort of a newsletter thing, they can use the MailChimp. They just have to learn a little bit about it. And we have a pretty extensive reach in the area. We maintain our mailing lists and database pretty thoroughly. It's not perfect, but we keep it up to date, and we're willing to share that. Have I forgotten anything there, Michelle, that's important?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. We have
I just have a question, Debbie.
Yes, who's this?
This is Tina.
Oh, hi,
So
Tina.
for instance, you said Marshall Valley, we pay $80 a year. What would the insurance be for? Like, or that's saying bookkeeping and accounting shared out at a much. So that's all we're paying for is bookkeeping and accounting.
But you pay for insurance too. So you would
Oh,
be
we
paying,
do. So then,
yeah, you do. Because you, so we carry directors and officers insurance, and we carry commercial liability insurance, $5 million. So for an example, if you, Marshall Valley, what's one thing? Oh, I know, because you guys are looking at doing fuel mitigation type projects, right? So
yep.
You will be expected to have insurance. So, and it will likely, you would be expected to have 5 million commercial liability insurance. So the total BRVCA bill for insurance is probably about just around $7,000. So what we do is we share out that cost. And so, you know, where you might be going, if you were to get $5 million commercial liability insurance, and what you're doing is fuel mitigation, you're probably going to be paying $2,000 to $3,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's huge. And insurance, it's getting it's getting more and more complex. And because we back to that BRVCA reputational assets at the bottom, we've had the same insurance broker for 12 years. He knows our operation inside and out. Like the last insurance policy this year came back, and I was reading through the exclusions, which I don't usually do. And here was bouncy toys. They're excluding frigging bouncy toys. So I went back to him because we have 2 bouncy toys. We don't use them maybe 2-3 times a year. I went back to him and said, you know, we need, so now he's trying to find us an extension on the insurance for the bouncy toys. But so just for an example with the insurance, when you heard me covering the points on legal risk and financial insurance, the risk piece plays into the insurance piece. And so that is where the communication back and forth between, say, Marshall Valley, for an example, and our board or our office, you know, something you're going to be doing something and you go, oh, just emailing us or calling and saying, we're thinking about doing X, Y, or Z, you know, is that going to impact the insurance? And then what we do is we go to the insurance broker, who's fantastic, and he usually says no. There's a few things that they consider high risk that they consider high risk that we would never think of, and vice versa. So does that explain a little better, Tina?
That
Hello?
is terrific. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the bookkeeping and accounting. So, I mean, we all run on some, you know, there's some fundraising for sure, but we are pretty much a grant-driven organization. So Marshall Valley, you know, is getting grants from SLRD, or the Braylon Recreation Area got a huge grant from the Northern Development Initiative Trust. So the bookkeeping and accounting system we use is also building our credibility as an organization. And so you as a committee of BRVCA is part of that credibility. But it also, that brings the other side of the coin in, where that communication is critical. And our system for financial stuff is pretty strict. And so, but it's not onerous, it's just strict. So, you know, we've managed to stay out of trouble for the most part financially. So, yeah. Any other questions? That, I think, is the end. It is. That's the end, you guys. Any other thoughts or questions?
Hey, Deb, it's Dale here. Thanks so much for putting this together, and the rest of the board for keeping the BRVCA operating. It sounds like a well thought out and, you know, fairly efficient way to do things in our little valley here. So thanks again for explaining all the different policies and such.
Yeah, well, I think it's just important when you're working with BRVCA that you realize what you're actually working with is like a 10-headed cobra or something. I don't know if that's the right description. Well, people tend to go, they refer to BRVCA as it's a person. And what it really is all these committees, you know, it's not just one sort of thing. So, yeah. And the other thing that we did apply this year for some funding to do an organizational review, because we've been kind of following along with this decentralized umbrella model for just over 10 years now. And what we want to do is kind of go through and say, okay, you know, what's working, what's not working, where, you know, where are our problems? What can we change? Do we want to change anything? We didn't get that funding, so we will be doing it next year. And it kind of gives us all an opportunity to navel gaze and say, okay, you know, this isn't really working. This drives us nuts. But I wouldn't say we're highly efficient. I just say that we've developed systems and that helps us survive. So we went, well, I was talking about the Braylorn Community Advisory Committee in 2012. We went from them to what you saw on that org chart. So the growth has been exponential. And so, you know, our board kind of sits back and goes, okay, are we at our capacity yet? You know, when do we reach our capacity? When does it become the law of diminishing returns? But so far we're still plugging along. So yeah. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Is that understandable?
Yeah, Dale here again. Yeah, from our standpoint, I'll summarize this and take it back to the board of the TIAX Ratepayers Association and see what comes about and let you know.
I'm gonna send you this PowerPoint. I'm gonna send everybody the PowerPoint so they've got it.
That'd be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Debbie.
Bye.